Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Critical Moves. I am your host, Jack. Today, I am joined by our usual host, Al. How are you doing, Al?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. And you?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm especially good because today we are also joined by someone we've interviewed before, almost a year ago, and just somebody that we had a really great time talking to. They provided two fantastic episodes of content where they were able to talk about all about the history of their games, their philosophy on developing strategy, their philosophy on interacting with players, and a bunch of really interesting developer insight going from modding to the way that they hired on modders from the community, contributors, the way that they feel about contributions from the community, the way they work with people in the industry. All in all, wonderful conversation, and that is just my way of introducing the return of Chris McElligott-Park.
Hi, thanks for having me. It's good to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy that you're back. It was a fantastic conversation. It really was, and I know Al and I had a great time. It doesn't require someone to be familiar with your games and your history on Steam or your history as an indie developer in the sphere of indie development back in the day to appreciate the words that you contributed and your thoughts behind developing indie games, the way the world worked at that time, the way it works now, and so many other really interesting anecdotes from publishers, development, when to start your career, and also the just the general mature choices that you made at the time, the way that you talked about going transitioning from modding other people's mods to making your own games. So that all was such great contributions.
Oh, I appreciate that. I'm 17 years into this now, so it's been a hot minute. So I guess and keeping up with lots of other people as well, who some have left the industry or some have been around longer than I have, and a lot of them are newer than me, but have done seen them blow past, and so it's a good vantage point, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. And so for those who aren't actually familiar with Chris's games but do want to know more, just to really concisely bring that up, Chris and his company, Arcen Games, have been around on Steam for almost forever. Before Steam, they were on storefronts. They were one of the first groups actually pushing indie games in that way. Chris initially created AI War, a game that he developed for his brother and father. Is that correct? You said?
My dad and his brother, actually. Yeah, so my uncle and my
Okay.
dad.
And he talked about the evolution of designing that as the way that they played strategy games together, and then the way of discovering the fun of making that almost just a purely single player game with the intention of dealing with an overwhelmingly difficult AI force. When we talked about it last time, AI War was a very prominent strategy title at the time. It put Arcane Games on the map. It helped project a potential career for Chris that he was able to evolve and capitalize on with his next titles. And he talked all about the history of that last time. He's gone on to make several more staple strategy game titles. But that brings us to the most important topic today, Heart of the Machine, Chris's current darling on Steam. And he's actually just announced update 1.0, where it will officially exit early access and release into full access.
Yeah, it's an exciting time. It's a big milestone for me, and uh, you know, this particular project's really different from any of my past ones. With maybe my least popular one ever, Shattered Haven. It had a narrative focus to it, but outside of that one, and out of stuff that's actually known, Heart of the Machine has a lot more narrative to it, even though it's still a strategy game. It's also a strategy RPG. Actually, in the last year, it's really been something that how to talk about it has crystallized a lot, because there's been just repeated user reviews that are explaining it. And uh, sometimes when there's like a negative review or something where they're kind of upset that it's not something else, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, you're expecting some other genre. That's what you're angry about, And it's been very fortunate to that there's like 6%, negative reviews. So it's been like 93 some odd percentage positive, and everybody explains it differently, but there's still like themes that come across with it, of some people who are there for the story, some people who are there for the strategy. There's some people who play it in spite of the story. They're like, I don't like this story, but I enjoy the mechanics and I just kind of look past the story. And then other people are like, I'm not really into strategy games, but I'm here for the story. I'm like, all right, well, I mean, the fact that it can function for both of those groups, and obviously, hopefully, everybody enjoys all the things. That's the ideal. But I mean, how many people play The Witcher 3 and they can't stand Geralt? And there are people that are that way, but hopefully most people that play The Witcher 3 actually like the main character and want to root for him. So that's been interesting to see um, as well. So at any rate, it's my first strategy RPG, and that is a very different sort of beast because um, one of the things I've noticed during early access, and kind of knew this was going to be the case, but it's more intensely the case this time, is that people want to play it when it's done. And when I think about it, I'm like, yeah, me too, actually. Like when I am going to play any game that has like an RPG component or like a farming simulator game or something like that that has narrative bits, then I want to play it all at one time because otherwise I'm going to forget what's going on, and then I'm going to come back in a few years when they're done, and then I'm going to play through it all then, or because I'm not gonna restart. I mean, I'm gonna resume my save from like 2023 on some like Roots of Pacha is one that I'm like, my wife started playing it again recently, and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember liking that game, but I'm gonna wait, and like I'm gonna wait another couple of update cycles before I resume playing. And so none of my past works really had that issue at all because it's like chess. If like there's a new season of chess or new pieces are being introduced later, it's kind of like you actually want to be in there early, and you don't care if there's new. So, pick a first person shooter, maybe it's a more easy thing. Like if there's a new map that comes out later that doesn't impact how you play on the map now, or the meta changes with some new class or some new gun or whatever, again, you don't care. Like there's no reason to wait. You kind of want to be there the whole time. And so that's interesting because this has more in common with like novels and TV and movies where it needs to be kind of this concrete, like this part's done. Like, you read the first trilogy of a book series and it's like the author's not going to go back and screw with that unless they're George Lucas. I'm kidding. But people have those sort of feelings about that sort of thing, and so I know there's certain things I can't change anymore. Not that I really want to anyway, but when some people are like, "Hey, what about changing this plot point?" I'm like, people would flay me. I'm not doing that. Like, I'll make new stuff, but I'm not. I'd like to explore this world further in post-release in some fashion, ideally, but I'm not going to go back and like, you know revise story bits that the player base has embraced at this point.
Chris, when we first spoke, and Jackson, is it really a year ago? I mean, time flies.
Yeah.
Your response to the very first question was that you felt that you were on the hook for making strategy games. I think this is because a non-strategy title that you were working on didn't really get the reception that you wanted. Having played Heart of the Machine, it's very dense. There's a lot going on, and it feels completely unlike any other strategy game that I've played. Is this your attempt to escape that hook? Because there are
Oh
so
yeah.
many elements in this. You say it's a strategy game, but there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. One of the things I introduced, I don't know, 6 months ago, something like that, September maybe. Maybe it was more recent. I don't remember now. May have been as recent as like October, so it's not been that long. Um, I introduced some complexity modes. So basically, complexity reduction modes. So the game already has difficulty levels. You play through on normal on your first go, no matter what, because you really need the knowledge from that, but in order to use that against the higher difficulties. But then some people just want to kind of show up for the story and they don't care about some aspect of it. There's all the different complaints, right? Because there's several different aspects to this, right? There's the hacking mini game. Some people don't want to do that at all. In fact, a lot don't. So there's a way to just turn that off so you don't have to. Like, it's still, you choose to hack, but it just skips the mini game and you just, it's like we're assuming you did it. That sort of thing, right? And some people who like the hacking mini game play it for a while, and they're like, I'm on my like seventh run. Like, I get it. Like, I don't want that interruption anymore. So they turn it off at that point. The debate mini game, again, same sort of thing, although that has more people like that than like the hacking mini game. Again, some people love the hacking mini game though. They're like, it makes me feel like I'm in an 80s movie doing the hacking, you know what I mean? And that really psychs up some people, and other people look at it and are like stun locked by the complexity. So it's like, hey, do you want that or not? Like, because that's not, it doesn't have to be, the game doesn't fail if that's not there. So we can just say you did it, like auto resolve in like um, Total War games. You know, like honestly, the way I have often, as much of an RTS history and background I have, I just don't like the RTS stuff in the middle of my 4X stuff in a Total War game. So I'd auto resolve all the battles. They're just like, we're going to assume you won the battle based on, we calculate based off of the amount of troops you brought. And I'm like, that's great. I'm playing this like a grand strategy game because that's how I personally feel like playing it. And there's other people who are like, I barely want to play the grand strategy part of Total War. I'm just here for the most ridiculous RTS type battles I can get. So you get this when any game blends genres or subgenres in that way, you're gonna have people who like one side more or the other side more, or who like both. And so the things along the lines of auto resolve tend to be necessary if you want to like for people who would happily play a game but they don't want to be in part B of it. They just want to do the A part. And here it's like there's the construction, city building side of things. Some people love it, some people don't. So you can really simplify that. There's the intense like resource economy, and some people really love the depth and are reading all the tooltips. And there's a lot of little lore and flavor text in there and little scientific roots and stuff in that. And other people are like, why are there so many resources? Like, cut this down, you know? And I'm seeing both of those things coming through before I added the complexity modes. Like, and I was like, you know what? Why not? Why not? I'm not cutting stuff down, but why not have a mode that does? And in that mode, the simplified economy, for example, it it acts like a bunch of things just don't exist. So if it would cost that resource, it just assumes that you have it. If it would generate that resource and that's all it does, it just doesn't show up in the game. And if you want to turn it back on, you know, and it's even got things you can turn off like the defensive game, so that if you want to play it more like a tactics game where you're doing offensive actions where you bring in troops and attack the enemy, that's one thing, but also simultaneously having to main defensive positions around the city. Some people don't want to do that because they're like tactics games, but they're not really into strategy games. You know, it's just like, all right, well, what if you didn't have to defend? We'll just say that your defenses are fine, and there's not going to be aggressors there. It's just about, you know, and that makes it slightly more XCOM-y, right? And if you turn all the stuff off, then it's like, well, this is now we're getting a little more towards like Citizen Sleeper or Disco Elysium or something where it's really just about choices in the story. And that honestly is the heart of the game. So if you strip it all the way back to that, then you're missing all of the kind of, oh, that's your choice. Well, prove your intention by executing it. You're missing that point because you're not having to prove it very hard, or there's a lot of things that get stripped out. But that's okay. Like that's what some people want. And so yeah, it was me trying to answer your actual question. Yeah, it was me trying to break out of the box. It was me bringing a bunch of things together. Um, but I think that a lot of strategy developers have been doing that. You know, if you look at a lot of the 4X games in general, they're pulling from board games or RTS or tactics games or a bunch of different things, trying to bring those together. Some have more detailed story campaign modes, some don't. You know, and for me, like an inciting reason for moving this direction was not entirely to escape strategy space, but like with AI War 2, it was like, okay, you're visiting like 100 planets and they're tactically and strategically meaningful if you know how to like, you know, it's like I don't even see the matrix anymore. I just see, you know, metal rich and, you know, good for upgrades or whatever, right? And other people look at it and just look at all the little icons, right? Because they don't know what's going on. You know, they're too new to it. And I was like, what if there was human context to this as well, like more so than like when a chess player looks at the board, they see something that a passerby who doesn't play chess, they're just like, look at the horses and the castle things, I guess. You know, but if there's like a human component, which I guess, it's like, are you going to let the boy die? Like we all get that. Like, irrespective of any other sort of strategic weight, it's like, no, yeah, sure, I'm going to let him die. That boy's a dick. Or no, I would never let him die. I actually, care about him. Or I liked him, but he reaps what he sows. There's these kind of teenage kids in the game that have a fun arc. They almost seem like they wandered in out of their own young adult novel, and things don't really, the player's kind of like, okay, they seem all right. And then it's like, I'm getting so sick of these kids. Like, and like how players deal with that really cracks me up, where it's like, do they really turn hostile to them? Or are they like, all right, you kids need to settle down and let me handle this. I'm the robot overlord here. Like, I'm the main character, actually. You are not. And the ability to do that sort of thing is really pleasing to me, because most of my nouns and verbs as a game developer before, as a designer, were chess pieces and chess moves and that sort of thing. And being able to have people have emotional feeling, I hate that dude, like, and seeing the memes that people make about Vorcyber and all the different things. And, one of my favorite reviews was like, I sent I sent a T-1000 on a mission, and he came back sad. And I was like, that's the best. That's one of my favorite things. I'm like, yeah, sure does, doesn't he? Like, and I mean, that's not something that normally would happen in a strategy game, but it is the sort of thing that happens in RimWorld. But in RimWorld, it's all just kind of comes out of the circumstances. And that's how like my prior game, The Last Federation, is. But for all of the great moments that come out of a random scenario, there's a lot of kind of bland ones, or the player's imagination has to do a lot of heavy lifting. And I was like, what if the player could still have imagination, but was met kind of halfway by a narrative that is, again, like, Disco Elysium, Citizen Sleeper, those sort of things, where it's like, giving you some story, but you still have agency. Like,
and player agency. This is something which I thought was really fascinating. I loaded up Heart of Machine today in preparation for this, to have another look at it. And right at the start, there's that binary choice when the android wakes up in the warehouse, and it's sapient, and the humans don't know, and he's trying to understand who he is and his place in the world. And then the first choice is deliver the box or kill the humans.
right.
And it was such a binary choice. It's like, wow, what am I going to do here? It just seemed to be so polarizing. I'm either going to just be docile and do as expected of me, or just go in the completely opposite direction and murder these people. And it was such a very stark choice to make. I wanted to talk about this morality, because I know that with update 60 that you put on Steam, you talked a lot about surprisingly wholesome twists with the is it the peace after
brutality. Yeah, it's the
peace
war
after
crimes
brutality,
ending, basically.
yeah, stacking war crimes on top of each other. But there's a wholesome moment, and then with the cooperative one, you can just right at the end just change your mind and just undo it all. And
You can, there's kind of the good ending scenario, sort of. You're being a nice robot, like you're trying to help people, and you can go, haha, I was kidding the whole time, right at the end. Or you can go, you know what, actually, you guys pissed me off, I changed my mind. Or kind of a medium version of, screw you guys in particular, okay, the rest of us carry on. We had a deal, but I just broke it. It's kind of your own personal Darth Vader moment. And the players often really hate the bad guys at that point. And there's this moment in the good style ending where you have them right in the palm of your hand, almost literally. It's a machine overlord. They're right there. And it's like, we made a deal, and this benefits everyone, including me, more if I honor the deal, but I hate those guys. What if and you can try and do something that's a little sneaky to try and get rid of them, and it turns out not to be very sneaky. But it's like, oh well, that's. I'm not going to spoil the moments, but it's and on the other one, you're just like, all right, well, I've used chemical weapons and I've nuked, maybe I racked up like tens or hundreds of millions of deaths by sending ICBMs at other cities and all this other sort of stuff, and it's like, I broke everything, and people wanted to like build a nicer society after that. Like I did actually destroy the awful power structure. Like a lot of nice people too, but like, all right, people are doing what people tend to do, which is try and make the best of it, and it's I had a thing last week where if you've gotten through that part of that particular ending, then there's a moment where it's like, okay, you've congratulations, you've kind of won. You're done. Like, you've defeated the evil empire, sort of. I'm trying to decide how much to say, because for spoiler purposes. But at any rate, you don't necessarily need to rub it in to a certain point. So I had done a thing like, just like, let's not nuke our allies now. And the immediate thing I got after putting out that release was some players going, whoa, 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 whoa. I was genociding all humans. Like, I don't care that they're ostensibly my allies. Just like, right, okay, carry on. Put it back so they could continue nuking. It was like, because that's the thing, is that the game is not trying to be judgmental about what you're doing. It's not trying to offer you perfect choices about anything. It's not trying to make you feel bad either, really. It's trying to have a like, that's one thing that bothers me about like Frostpunk. Like, it's a great game, but it seems designed to make me feel like negative emotions about people. And I'm totally down with like bad people and in stories, you know what I mean, and bad situations and all that sort of stuff. But I'm fundamentally a lot more optimistic, I guess. But I know that not every player is going to agree with that. And so I just kind of, well, let's game it out. Okay, if you make a deal with these particular bad guys, what would that look like? And if you want to double cross them, what would that look like? And what's the consequences? And that's something that I think is really fun and really different, because it's hard to, and right now we're kind of focusing on the endings, and you can look at the beginning too, right? And you're saying there's a really stark choice there. Do I murder these people? I just woke up. I just became sapient. Is murder the absolute immediate thing? My circuits are filled with fear because I'm anxious about suddenly being, am I going to be discovered, right? Do I murder the two people in front of me, or do I just carry on? That's the choice as the text presents it to you, right? But the reality is they're sending you on a delivery. So you can walk out. Yeah, sure, I'll take the package. I'm not going to murder you right now. They're not going to necessarily notice in the first 5 minutes that you're alive, like sentient, sapient. And so, you can immediately defect from your first decision. I mean, you can't take it back and murder. That's not a thing you can do. But you can say, I'm not going to murder anymore. Like, that was a youthful mistake. I'm done with that. I'm gonna be a good robot from now on, and then you can change your mind again. And so that's the whole thing of like, you're not being locked into a dark side or a light side. There's not like dark side points or whatever. And I don't know why you're doing stuff. Did you kill someone out of fear, or because you're planning to genocide the continent? Are you being compliant to get them to shut up and get away from them? Or are you being compliant because you're really wanting to like be compliant? You know what I mean? Like, you just like want to stay like under the radar and see where things play out if you don't rock the boat too much, And so throughout the game, there's choices like that lead you into kind of gradations of things. And one of the really big parts of that is that the setting had to be appropriately violent. And this is one of the reasons why I think people like Old West shows in particular, right? Because if you got a bunch of outlaws or whatever and they killed your brother or whatever, then obviously you're out for a blood feud, right? That's something. That's usually the way of it, right? But if somebody like robbed a bank or something like 10 towns over and you run into them, whether you're a lawman or you're just a regular Joe or whatever, you're not necessarily going to be immediately violent towards them. But if you were, people would be okay with it because they're like, well, you must be a good guy because you killed those bank robbers. And you're like,
Yeah.
actually, I'm a serial killer, but I just ran. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much violence inherent in the Old West that it's normalized, and therefore weird, complicated relationships with people who are morally gray show up a lot, and you see that play out in movies like Logan, for example. I mean, that's a kind of retelling of Shane, sort of, but so we wanted that Old West ethos here, where companies are like running black ops, uh, you know, assassination raids against other sub companies and stuff, and because they're all ultimately owned by one megacorp in this particular region, and if that's kind of the status quo, then if you kill a few people, then there's a lot of people that are okay with that, yeah, let's work together anyway. If the characters are too obviously moralizing about stuff, uh the traditional paladin sort of thing. I'll never forgive you now that you've done blah blah blah. So I was like, well, I don't like you. I don't like you killed so and so, but maybe we can work together. You know, then that setting is more rich for this sort of thing. So, in a lot of ways, there's absolutely no iconography or like visual theming of the Old West, but like the emotional state of the world is somewhere between neo-feudalism and westerns because it's the most fun place to play, because it's lower consequences in a lot of ways, but still consequences, just different.
And I know I'm kind of lingering over this point. It's right at the start of the game, but
Sure.
it was almost as if it wasn't a case of kill them in order to stop being killed yourself or run away.
Mhm.
Those weren't
Oh
the
yeah,
choices.
they're just office workers.
Yeah, because you could kind of understand that choice. Well, if I don't kill them, they're going to, so there's my motive for taking this
Right.
action. The choice is just so stark.
Yeah.
Kill them. There's no reason for it.
Right.
Just
But the
do it
thing
anyway.
is, you are bigger than an 800-pound gorilla. You're a technician robot at that point, but you're still incredibly weak. But you're made of hydraulics, man. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like you could, bench press a car if you needed to. And these are just office workers sending you on a, you know what I mean? But you're
Yeah.
having this kind of freak out moment of just, oh God, should I kill everybody? Because I sure could. You know what I mean? And the power disparity is one of the immediate themes, right? Of you are that much like Terminators in general uh, are just on a different level. And we as humans aren't used to dealing with that, right? Because a small group of us, if the strongest man in the world is getting violent, a small group of us just need to get some pointy sticks or some other weapon, rock, whatever, right? And we can subdue that guy. If there's several silverback gorillas that are loose, that's not going to go the same way that it would with the strongest man in the world because they're just so much stronger than us, and we often don't realize that. And we're not used to being in that position as a species. You know what I mean? We're like, 6 people, that's enough for the strongest man. We'll get him. You know what I mean? Like, especially if we have makeshift weapons at least, right? And these machines are just so much stronger, and that's how we would build them. So they're almost like dealing with small animals. It would be it's like how many cats would it take to get the average person down? Like a lot of cats. Like cats aren't that strong compared to humans, and that's kind of where humans are compared to these machines they've made. So a lot of times in the prologue in particular, it's not like it's so casual. You just it's just so easy to do it. Like, do you care even? And they're just so faceless, you know?
Mm.
And so it invites you into that violence almost because it's like this would be so easy and I would barely even have to clean up. Just flick my arm and they're dead. You know what I mean? Let's just go. And then there'd be two people less around and they'd blame, equipment failure or some other human or something, right? It's kind of priming you into that.
I'm conscious that I've hijacked because Jack really wanted to talk to you, and I've just hijacked. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll let Jack. I'm sorry. In the prologue, and this is going to hopefully get you to explain a lot of the things about Half the Machine that people might not see as immediately obvious. In the prologue, the android has this deep sense of deja vu, like it's been through this
Mhm.
before. And there's talk of overlapping timelines or timelines running in parallel. Can you talk to me about how that works in Heart of the Machine?
Yes. Some people will feel like this is a spoiler. So for those people, maybe give them a timestamp to skip ahead a little bit. But it's honestly part of the premise of the game. So this is one of those um, discussions that players have of like, hey, my personal opinion is it's not too much of a spoiler because it's part of the premise. But and so the prologue goes out of its way to hint at it. But yeah, basically you're in a really long time loop. So it's not Groundhog Day because in Groundhog Day he lives the same day over and over and over again. But there is an aspect of that with individual timelines, but it runs for what would be the equivalent of a few months. And from a player's perspective, it's anywhere from 5 to 50 hours. Depends on the player speed. The average is like 10 to 20 hours. And that's a long time loop, right? Because like 12 minutes, the game, that's 12 minutes, and there's a lot of ones that take 20 minutes for a time loop or, like the Outer Wilds, it's a 20-minute time loop, right? I don't know of any 20-hour time loops, but this is one. And what's different here, though, usually when you go through time loop, you can't bring anything with you. And when you're done with it, you're done with it. And this is a little more like SimCity 4, where they had the region and then the multiple cities, where once you're able to start going through time, you're able to start essentially a new loop, but you're able to bring over certain information with you, which allows you to then construct things. And some physical objects also phase over kind of without your intention behind it. But once you learn what phase is over, then you can kind of manipulate that as well. And you can jump back to loops that you were already in. So you can be going through one timeline, get stuck on something, go somewhere else, that's in the past, but in a parallel timeline, move forward, get something, have that carry over knowledge-wise into the other one, and then suddenly your other character's just struck with inspiration, and they are like, oh, and it's that character doesn't, because you've got multiple parallel versions of your character, and they don't have the episodic memory of what happened. They don't remember why this thing is bleeding into their mind all of a sudden. You do as the player. You're like, yeah, we did this whole other mission. And you developed this thing out of necessity, and then your other version just remembered, what if I did the same thing? What's that? And then you can use it in a different context. And so that is very unusual and is it's a fun way of kind of bringing strategy through time. And a lot of players are kind of reluctant to get into that because they feel like they kind of want to do one timeline and then not delve because it's scary to go, I've spent 15 hours now in this one timeline. Do I really want to jump to another one? It's like, no, you totally. There's some key ways that will make it so you go way faster through the second one and make totally different choices, and then that it benefits that first one. So so the game helps out a lot with nudging players into that, and that becomes one of the key things that I've never seen another game do. I mean, it's modeled like SimCity 4, the regions. That was the thing I was thinking about, because you've got like, here's my gross industrial city, and this is where I ship all my trash and my pollution to. You know what I mean? And it supplies electricity back to my other city that's nice and environmentally pretty and all the things, right? And that was really fun. I was like, what if you could do that with time? And totally, different realities. Here's the one where I torment all the humans and I'm a huge dick. And, I've gotten all these secrets and things by being the worst machine. And here's the one where I'm a pacifist and I don't even kill anybody and I'm super nice, but I'm reaping the benefits of the murder machine over here. Like, because I've remembered some things that Murder Machine learned. And it's like, so you've got these two totally different, ethical versions of yourself that you're playing, and that's really fun, and that helps people experiment as well, because and we've all probably seen the statistics of like 90% of people, when given a good and an evil choice, they'll choose good if they can, right? Like Baldur's Gate and 3 and all these other ones talk about that, right? And I was like, what, how do I tempt people? Seriously, how do I tempt people into evil more? Because evil can be really fun. And I've only played one Baldur's Gate 3 run, and I played quite evil, and um, and it's fun. Like it's also fun being really good. But if people are only going to have one playthrough, I'd honestly like to have them have kind of a mixed one. So it's like, here's the one where I'm being good, and then what if I just do a small timeline where I'm really evil and I get the benefits of it? You know what I mean? So it's a way of tempting them into doing stuff they might not do otherwise. And it's not about what your real morality is. That's not the point. It's what kind of character are you choosing to role play as, right? And how does that affect the world around you? And yeah. So the timelines thing is a way to lower the stakes a little bit. We're not here to have a moral judgment of you. And your character is a complex one who could go a bunch of different ways. They might be acting out of fear, or out of just genocidal hatred, or out of compassion for humanity, or out of compassion for animals but a hatred of humanity. That's a thing too. There's an ending that a lot of people have always asked for, and there's a way to do it where it's like, can I just kill all the humans and then make a thing for my cats and dogs? It's like, yeah, absolutely, let's do that. um and so that's I think maybe when people are coming to, like, for instance, like Dungeons and Dragons, they're more likely to want to be somewhere in the middle. Let's have some nuance to me. I don't want to be a goody two shoes paladin. I mean, I've often played a paladin in D&D, to be honest, but people also don't often want to be that evil because it locks out a lot of things. But when they're coming to like something that they're thinking of as a Skynet simulator, sometimes they're like, yeah, let's get those humans. Well, let's do that. And, they play Plague Inc., right? There's no morality behind that. You're just being a virus or bacteria or whatever, right? The expectation is you're going to kill everybody. And here, some people come in with the expectation that they're going to be like a murder hobo, so to speak. And then they're like, oh, but these people are kind of nice and I feel kind of like a jerk. Maybe I'll stop that for a while. And then they're like, those guys, actually, those guys are dicks, so I'm going to get them. And so, people come in from all sorts of different preconceptions. And my goal is to shake those up and get them to just experiment, rather than, and then that's really my goal. It's not to moralize at them, but to get them to do whatever it is they wouldn't have normally done. If they were coming in to be Skynet and be genocidal, can I make them be compassionate? If they were coming in to be really nice, can I tempt them to evil? And so that's where I come from, is not trying to get them to do the good thing, but trying to get them to do whatever it was they weren't initially going to do.
And Chris, I did want to jump back, not to rehash everything about the narrative, and especially because we've been talking so much about binary choices, but to go back to your announcement of 1.0, some of the things that you covered in your announcement was very, very basic. Not basic in the sense of their basic announcements, but you covered some very fine points that were a little vague so that you could save the rest of it for the actual release. But you mentioned that this was 1.0 resembled the ending of the original trilogy to you, or the comparison of that to other media in print. So you've spoken a lot about narrative now. I'm just interested. I don't necessarily want to know those endings myself, so I'm not asking you that because I am waiting for that 1.0 release. But what does it mean for you to, one, like Al asked earlier, kind of step outside the realm of strategy games just a little bit with a narrative strategy RPG, and to have, as an individual, a creative, narratively crafted something so intricate that you could have only imagined before with something like AI War that had to be a little bit more vague, and that you did your best to build a world out of and a larger universe for. So you're putting a capstone on that. You're finishing it off with multiple endings, which is already a testament for any RPG game. And it's also supposed to be a decisive end, something that you've already spoken in your announcement of challenging yourself with, because previous Arcen games don't have a definitive end or something satisfying in the sense of rolling credits, right? If I was to bring all of that back together, how is it for you as a creative to finish this project, put a capstone on it, and deliver that narrative experience to players?
Speaking in analogies is maybe a useful thing here, like analogies from other games. And I'm tempted to go with some non narrative genres to avoid making too direct of a comparison. So, I mean, Mario 64 is one I come back to. Not a very narrative game, obviously, not a very strategic game either. I love that game, though. So, that's a great platformer. And one of the key things about it is that there's kind of a core experience to Mario 64 that involves Mario saving the princess, right? And there is a point where he does that. And you're like, you have saved the princess. Congratulations. And you need 70 stars, for those not in the know, to do that. And there are 128 in the game. And so you can go, all right, cool. As a casual player, I go in, I can get any 70 stars, and then I can save the princess by beating the final boss. And there's a definitive final boss where you go, that's him. I got him. And then the princess gives you cake, and whether that's a metaphor or not is something that the internet likes to debate. But you roll credits and you've got the cake at the princess, and then it's like, but also, like you could be done now, or you can come back and there's another 50 stars for you to go do, and guess what? They're a lot more challenging. And so for the average player, they're like, yeah, let me do a few more stars because I just enjoy the platforming. You know what I mean? Like there's just that funness to it. And then they probably hit a point, the average player, where they're like, it's not fun anymore. I already got the princess and the cake. Maybe I'll beat that final boss again just to put a capstone on it, because that would be a nice place to end. I've got to 90 stars. I'm not having fun anymore. Gonna beat that boss again, and then I'm done for a while. And then they set the game aside, and that's that. And they can go. And then for other people, they're like, I'm getting all the stars. I'm doing the 100% thing, And so there's an element of that in the 1.0 here, right? Because to 100% the game takes about 175 hours minimum. Most people will take longer to do it, but the minimum reasonable time to expect somebody to do it in is 175 hours. That's a lot of hours. The minimum amount of time to like roll credits is somewhere in 20 to 40 hours. And that's if you're really gunning it and you kind of know what you're doing. For somebody to like see all of the things, in other words, make all the various like choices in all the possible combinations and most of the possible combinations and get all of the like normal difficulty achievements, that's 90 hours, And so there's this spectrum right there of how involved players want to get with any particular game. With Baldur's Gate 3, that's a good comparison point of like, well, there's so many branches and stuff, and it would take ridiculous number of hours to play all of them, but you wouldn't necessarily want to play all of them. Heart of the Machine invites you to play a lot more of them than Baldur's Gate does because of the quicker, as long as it is, you're still able to grab a bunch of other decisions and have them fold back in because of the timeline mechanics. And so that makes it much more straightforward than having a completely new save file that's just a blank slate and this is some 60-hour experience you're going to start over from scratch. That it doesn't do it that way. It's handled, where there's a progression, a meta progression that it brings through. And so to me, again, I have to speak in metaphors a lot of times because it's like, well, okay, when you've got a big branching set of storylines and stuff, there's in a lot of other media, like, okay, let's pick Star Wars. In the core trilogy, it's like, really, does Luke deal with Darth Vader and the Emperor in some fashion, and how does he do that, right? And so there's a definitive set of some stuff that happens with Luke and the Emperor and Darth Vader, and that, if we wrap those up, then thematically we've wrapped things up. But hey, wait a second. There's all this other stuff with like these Mandalorian people that could be around at the same sort of time, right? There's like, we've run into these like crime syndicate people, and we've run into these Ewoks, which we may like or not like. And hey, what about a Wookiee planet? And there's like all these other things that Luke's journey to dealing with Darth and the Emperor, that's one thing. But then there's this separate, well, this is a pretty big world, actually. Like, we could go off and do all these other sort of things. And, hey, is there a whole story and, how they got the Death Star plans, like stuff like that, right? And so the idea of the 1.0 is to kind of provide that sense of a kind of core trilogy, because you're probably, if somebody's doing, fully exploring it, okay, 90 hours, that's long, compared to like Star Wars, you're looking at like 9 hours, maybe ish. Not even that, really. It's an hour and a half times 3, so that's under 7 hours, I guess. But then it's like, I was a fan of how, for example, Star Wars was spinning off into the extended universe as much as they wanted to, when it didn't erase what Luke did, or Luke's like that central Skywalker storyline. And so I guess that's how I look at it, is going, this is like a trilogy in one, because you've got that kind of narrative arc, and you can go a more evil route or a more good route, but there's still a bunch of variants in there, and you can flip to being kind of evil at the end of the good one if you want to. And there's some redeeming qualities about the evil side of things as well. And if I pursue more endings and so forth, they won't undo that, right? Like, they'll explore different things, and again, they'll have a mix of good and evil, sure, but people don't need to wait for those. And if there's not an audience for that, I can walk away from the project going, you know what? Core trilogy, dusted. Like, that's different. There's a difference between walking away from like bug fixes and little balance tweaks and stuff. Like, I'm going to be around for that sort of thing. And I'm hoping to do like some post-launch content. But if players are like, no, we don't want that, like, we just want to do this thing. And I guess maybe the Outer Wilds is a good example. There's a time loop game, and it has a bunch of puzzles, and it's got a core mystery and so forth. And you do not need the DLC to that game. Like, if you're really into that game, get the DLC. It's really good. But if you're not that into it, or you just want to have the core story, that's also fine. And it's difficult as a creator to kind of create those boundaries, right? Because there's some post-launch content or DLCs or whatever. By post-launch content, I mean stuff that's free updates, like Stardew Valley. We'll take that one. Like, at the original 1.0 of Stardew Valley, they're now on 1.6. There's all these other things. You can raise fish, and you can do all this other stuff. And that's great. But if you played Stardew Valley at 1.0, you weren't like, where's the freaking fish? I want to raise fish. That wasn't like on your radar. Like, it's not, so like, if you want to play, Stardew Valley is coming up on its 10-year anniversary now. And if you wanted to play it 10 years ago, that was a great time to play it. Now is also a great time to play it. And with games that have a premise that they're putting forth that you want to know that it's paid off, right? Like, am I able to get the Emperor, or like reconcile or kill Darth Vader or whatever, whatever's going on? Like, you want to know, Stardew Valley, am I able to like get married and have kids and then like make my grandpa proud? Like, yeah, you were at the start. And I think a lot of people who are kind of more on the story side of things want to know that there's enough complete that they can do that core adventure and go, yeah, that was fun, bye forever, or maybe I'll do a little more. And that's having exit points where people don't feel pressured to do more or buy more if there's ever DLC is important to me, because I want them to feel like they got a complete thing and they're not like, I should have waited for the definitive edition, 10 years later, like, no, don't worry about it. Like, if you want to come back for another adventure or something and there is more adventure later, then cool. And there is more adventure than the average player wants right in the 1.0. So most people are going to walk away before they see everything. And that's the whole point, is that it's personal to you at that point of what were the parts that were important to you as a player. And being comfortable with people missing some content, even the coolest content that I feel like, is the coolest thing, having a bunch of people miss that has to be okay, and that's really different from like your average AAA where they're trying to make sure everybody sees the cool bits in this 10 hours they spend with it and then get out of here, kid. you know so it's a challenging design situation, but I think it's pretty familiar to anybody who plays like Factorio or RimWorld or Stardew Valley or a lot of these sort of things, right? Because there's a core to it, and then there's stuff that's offshoots of that core. And anybody can come in and play the core and go, I'm good, don't need offshoots, or go, yeah, I enjoyed that core, and I would very much like all the offshoots you want to give me, whether that's in the base game or something that comes after. And because there's a disconnect, there's not a unified audience, right, that all want the same thing. Being able to offer more to some people and offer a variety of experiences to people who just want to see what's up and do their own thing, like once, most people don't complete games. So being able to offer a way for them to complete a storyline at least and go, that was fun. That's a good place for me to stop while I move on with my endless backlog. That's been a thing that I've been wrestling with through all of early access, really.
Speaking of moving on beyond early access as well, I mean, you are going to be purposefully reluctant to share information on what full release looks like on March 6th to the community up to that point, because like you said, I mean, you appreciate the fact that you don't have roadmaps. You also want that to be a capstone moment where you're able to announce all of that. You also mentioned that you have a massive amount of patch notes, which I hope gets people excited. What are some things that you can tell us about the 1.0 release so that you have the opportunity to plug that in? And I'm just so curious, as somebody who's waited for that 1.0 release, what are some of the details you're willing to share about what that looks like?
Sure. I mean, it it adds in the cybercratic ambitions, tier 3 like ending scenario. And that's the main difference between the build that's currently out for everybody and the 1.0. And it compared to like early access first build, which was 0.65, and then the 1.0 build, they're like the amount of general content almost doubled. Most of that is for later game content and so forth. And there's been a lot of like harder difficulty modes and like easier complexity modes, and you know a focus on scraping off all the sharp edges that were there, so that that were kind of annoying some people. So that's I think overall I'm really open about it, but the there's I'm try to be sensitive to spoilers on the one hand, and two, I don't want people to just endlessly go, I'm gonna wait for like the Roots of Pacha situation for me, right? Of like, actually, to be honest, I played Roots of Pacha, I don't know, 2 years ago, and I enjoyed it. I played it all the way, all through all the things. I didn't feel like it was lacking. They've been developing for another 2 years, and I'm like, yeah, okay. I mean, I want to go back and play it again and play more, but they've already said there's going to be another big thing coming after the current one. So I'm like, I'll wait for that. And one of the things I want to avoid is having players always in that perpetual state of, I'll wait for that next thing, right? Because they wind up just kind of never feeling comfortable. And I don't know that I want to make endless next things in this. Like, if the audience is there and wants to do that, then yeah, sure, I'd love this world and I'd love to expand it. But I also really like, for example, the original Matrix, the movie. Like, I enjoyed the two sequels that came after, and I did not watch the fourth. And my enjoyment of this second two movies in that trilogy were largely diminished compared to my just love of the first one. But I'm not sorry they made them, and I'm not sorry that I watched them. And so, uh, I guess I kind of come at it there of like, here's not that I want to compare my work to The Matrix. That's like a perfect script and perfectly executed movie. But in terms of everything isn't possibly done that could be done with the first Matrix movie, obviously they made several more that expanded on the lore, and there were open questions in the first movie. But if they had stopped there, it wasn't like a cliffhanger that, oh my gosh, what could possibly happen? I feel like this movie doesn't stand alone. Like, that's the thing, is that if they had stopped with the first Matrix, it would have been okay, and it would have been an all-time classic movie anyway, because it stood alone. But it also had room for expansion, and when they did expand it, most of the world was a little bit lukewarm on it, aspects of it, but was glad to be back in that world. And other people were like, I'm good. And my dad was that way with the first Star Wars. He was like, I saw, Star Wars, the movie, it wasn't called A New Hope. He saw it in theaters. He's like, I saw Star Wars, and that was great. I didn't need more. I didn't need, some like The Empire Strikes Back. That's like the best bit. That's my favorite part. And he's like, yeah, that's all right. I'm like, okay. And that's kind of how I think people, there's such a diversity of opinion on how much people want from any sort of media that they engage with. And if you've got that, I just blew up the Death Star and Darth Vader got sent off, and that's the end to you. If that's the moment where it's done for you, okay, like that needs to be okay. Versus if it's like the moment when you've gone through all this stuff and you know the truth about Darth Vader and you see what Luke has truly become, and that's the end for you, great. If you also like the sequel trilogy and you like the character changes in Luke and all that, then okay, cool. That's also fine. Like, I'm kind of an OG trilogy sort of guy, but I love certain other stories that have involved Luke, and I like them to varying degrees. And that's the thing, right? Is that if you provide a rabbit hole and people are able to go, I got closure at the end of the first Star Wars, and that was all I wanted. I didn't need The Empire Strikes Back. Or you were like, The Empire Strikes Back was the best bit.
It was the best bit.
It was the best bit.
It was
but
the
my
best
dad
bit.
disagrees.
Well, your dad's wrong.
I know he's wrong. I agree, he's wrong. But as a creator, I have to accept the fact that there are going to be people who are like, all I needed was the first Star Wars. I didn't need The Empire Strikes Back, and that they should be, that's, man, does that first movie end on a high note? You know what I mean? Like, they get medals and stuff, except Chewie, and that's okay. And that's if somebody doesn't want to engage with it more after that, even though the best bits come later, it's okay. Like, I think that's okay. If they, it's weird, but I mean, like, everybody's only got so much time in their life, so they're going to invest however much they want to in things. Versus if you're like talking the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, like, it's not done when you finish the Fellowship of the Ring. It's not done at the end of the Two Towers. Like, if you stop anywhere before the Return of the King, that's a little weird. Like, I think you didn't really like it that much. Like, it was a fun adventure, and then it's like a major, but it is a one story told across a trilogy, and it's weird to stop partway through one story. Versus Star Wars is one story in one movie, and then also is one story over a trilogy, and then also is one story across stuff that expands beyond that trilogy too. And that kind of Russian nesting doll of what's a complete story is really interesting to me. So the 1.0 here, it has the Russian nesting doll of what I think of as like the Star Wars, like the equivalent of like the Star Wars trilogy, right? You can stop at the end of, the New Hope, metaphorically speaking, or you can go all the way to, the Return of the Jedi ending, metaphorically speaking, or you can keep going into the expanded universe. And then if I make anything else, then it's like, all right, that's separate. Those are like book 4. And I often like book 4 quite a bit. And like the Dragonlance series when I was a kid, I really liked the core trilogy. And then I also liked the 4th book. And then they actually made another trilogy as well. And that was also quite good. But, so that's the kind of thing I grew up on. And that kind of endless serial stuff, like James Bond, like I really love Casino Royale. That's a movie that stands on its own. And there's an endless serialization of James Bond, and that's okay. But there's something less satisfying about that compared to Indiana Jones, where it's like that first movie stands on its own, but the third one is the best. Like The Last Crusade is by far the best. And, weirdly, you can just watch The Last Crusade and have no idea. I mean, everything that you need to know is in that movie, but it's probably better if you start with Raiders and watch the entire trilogy, but you don't have to. And media is weird because the order in which people come to it and the expectations of how much they want from it and what do they want from it. There are a lot of people who really prefer Raiders, and that's fair. I really prefer, The Last Crusade, but I like Raiders as well. So it's just when you are making something that's non-linear and kind of goes all over the place, by nature, you're fragmenting your audience, right? And that has something in common with a serial series like Sherlock Holmes or James Bond or to some extent, the Indiana Jones films, where you can just kind of have to assume some people are coming in at a different movie than other people. Ultimately, if they all have a good time, that's all that really matters. And then if there's further adventures of, as a kid, I liked Young Indiana Jones, and I never liked the newer sequels, but that's okay. Like other people do, and some people do, and so that's I don't know. It gets very complicated very fast to talk about what is complete, And Raiders of the Lost Ark, that was complete. The Temple of Doom, they literally rode off into this, or not Temple of Doom, the Last Crusade, they literally rode off into the sunset. That was complete. But I wasn't like, oh, you could never tell another Indiana Jones story. Like, I was unhappy with some of the ones they chose to tell, but there was room for more, always, even though he rode off into the sunset already. So that's where I come from. And it gets really hard to talk about in the context of one really long game. And that's why I bring up Mario 64, because it's like easy to grasp immediately. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, I get it. You can do whatever 70 stars you want. And like that's non-linear in exactly the same way. There's a core like 40 stars everybody's going to get probably, and the exact last 30 stars that somebody ends the game on varies by player. And then whether they go past that 70 star mark is hard to say. That's a lot easier. It's a lot more palatable to say than like the Empire Strikes Back wasn't necessary or something, right? So, that's where I'm coming from. And it's really hard to talk about coherently because most media isn't fragmented in this way. But when you set out to make something that's branching, you're immediately trying to.
Absolutely, Chris. And I think everything that you're saying on the subject of one, approaching a narrative, the development of a narrative, the doors that leaves open, but also a topic that you're kind of hovering around, I'm sure on purpose, which is post 1.0. And so I'm not putting you on the hook to tell me what that content is or what that looks like or what you have in mind. But what I am curious about is Arcen Games does have a precedent in its history for releasing they release post-launch DLCs specifically, so paid content bundles. And I also think as a testament to your development philosophy and your direction on these things, and I know you've spoken about how some of those DLCs have come to be specifically for AI War 1 in the past with the community's involvement and your history of getting into development and what inspired that. So, in the sense of bringing that back to Heart of the Machine, I'm curious, is this a game that looks more live service to you, where you're expanding on the narrative in this, not seasonal way? I don't want to use that terminology, but something where you're building on it in a way where you have players coming back for a reason. And I understand that from a business perspective, there is not a monetization practice there. Or is it just like AI War 1 and 2 specifically that have very positive reviews of very popular DLCs that have constantly been quoted in their reviews across storefronts for having a massive amount of content, for having very substantial features, something comparable to like a Paradox expansion that really changes up the way you can play the game and gives you a reason to replay it from the beginning? Is it more of a, like you're saying, almost a TV show approach of sequential stories that come about in future updates or releases? Or is it where each DLC, and do you see a future of monetized content in that way that enables you and enables players to basically buy into a particular expansion, something that really broadens the story, really gives a definitive own self-contained plot aspect, really evolves the narrative in that way? Or is it something much smaller and updatable for you?
It's tricky to say anything definitively right now because there's a you need to see exactly what the reception, so many people have been waiting for 1.0, right? So what kind of legs does the base game have, right? If it's, you know, something like, I mean, at the upper end of the scale, you've got something like RimWorld where it sells like, 4 million copies over, like a decade though. But, and when you're in that sort of situation, my philosophy has been to, you know, kind of be grateful to the player base for um, the success, and give some freebies, back there with all of the AI War One and AI War. Well, with all the AI War One DLCs, there was also free content that came out at the same time, so that people that wouldn't, I don't like trying to FOMO people into stuff, right? I want them to get in if they want to get into something more. I want it to be because it's a good value and something they actually want to get into, not because they just felt like they were pressured into it, or like the experience was incomplete without it or something, which is sometimes a complaint I've never had on my stuff, but it's been a complaint against certain games, and it's something I like to be nowhere in the vicinity of. At the same time, with the way this game is structured, the mechanics and the storylines are really tied to each other, and I wouldn't put them like, hey, what's Luke's next adventure, like, and one of the nice things about this, like I said, how this is kind of like a Wild West sort of situation. It can go in all these different directions, and there's kind of loose threads where it's like, you could have gone and done your character could go and do this, and it's not even a thing where it's like, oh well, after you defeat the evil empire, do you also do this? It's like, what if I did this instead? Like, what if I don't care and I wanted to go off and do this? Or what if I wanted to defeat them a different way and I'm a totally worse person or an even better person or whatever? Like, there's other ways to explore technology and violence and the society, the role of those things, and the machine overlords, relationship to society. And so every potential plot line kind of comes with its own both recurring gameplay from the core game loops, and comes with some twists of its own, and sometimes those bleed out into the larger whole. But I kind of want to stay away from that to a certain extent. And I guess for me, when I imagine what those might look like, I often think of The Witcher 3 or Cyberpunk 2077. Honestly, those are really great DLCs, and they're all story focused. You don't need them. You don't have to play them to play the core experience, because there's a core game about, Geralt and Ciri, and there's a core thing about, about V against the Megacorp there, and with Johnny Silverhand and all that sort of stuff, and that all plays out without the DLC, so nobody's being FOMOed into those things. But if you're really invested in the world, then there's meaty other stories that's like, hey, before we resolved all that with the end of the main game, so to speak, here's this other very consequential thing. And in the case of like Phantom Liberty, that has a whole alternate ending to the main storyline. That's fun, because there's no reason to not, why not do that? And so I think like that's kind of the gold standard for me, because it's a thing that doesn't negate anything in the core experience, and the player doesn't have to play Phantom Liberty to get the, like nobody's being forced into that in order to get the true experience. But it's really good, and if you like Cyberpunk 2077, you may as well do it. But there's not a thing where you go, oh, play Cyberpunk 2077 to a certain point. You have to have the DLC though, and then play that DLC and don't do the real ending, because the real ending is not there. The regular ending's not any good. Like you have to do the DLC ending. That's the only one that's gonna. It's like no, it's really friendly, and I really like that model. And that I don't have a model in my own prior body of work that fits, because the story aspect changes everything. And so, giving people a reason to slot that in, but not making it a mandatory thing. And if Cyberpunk 2077 had ended without any DLC at all, it would have been fine. And they did a lot of actually their launch was one thing, but they made a lot. Even once the game was in a good state, they continued to make a lot of like content updates and little systems updates and other balance things and all that they went beyond what they probably had to, and that was good for everybody. So there's kind of a, it's hard to say. Like it depends on, like the game's in a polished and complete state where if I walked away from it, I think it'd be all right. Like that would be fine. There's nothing to like morally hold me here where it's like I have to stay here because I need to make it right to players or something, Um, but I really genuinely love the world and would like to do more storylines. So the question becomes like, well, how big are they? How do they slot in? Like, do I do some storylines for free? It's just like post-launch stuff at some point. Like, that would be something I would enjoy. I don't want players to wait for that, or feel like they're missing out if they don't do it. But those sorts of side stories are fun. And if there's a group of stories that make good sense as a DLC, that would be fun as well. So, but if players are like, we've got enough, then that would be a message received on my part, and I was just like, okay, let's move on to another game then. For Arcen, this certainly isn't the last game I ever want to make, but but I would like to do more. As long as this game is, it's 175 hours, 100% to 100% it, and and it's been 4 years of my life, but there's still more stories that I'm like, oh, you know what, I could run along with that. Like I've got other ideas, so it really comes down to like, what is the size of the audience? What's financially feasible and fair for everybody who's involved? If the game is blowing off sales numbers, then it's going to be like, well, let's maybe dial it back on some things. If it's kind of like, all right, this is, a hot niche thing, then it's like, all right, well, what's feasible to do? So, and that's part of why I don't want to commit to a roadmap, and part of it also is just like, there's so much that it's just there already. Let's, like, if it's a movie, people are weird when they're talking about the next movie after that. Like, just enjoy the one, but games are different, and with rightly so, especially with all the branching and stuff. And I think a lot of people want to know, like, should I wait, or like, and like with the Spider-Verse movies, for example, like that first one stood on its own, the second one did not. And then there's like a 4-year gap from the second one to the third one. And I'm waiting for that, but I'm looking forward to it. But I would have been fine stopping with the first one, stopping with the second one, not so much, because it was incomplete on its own. And one of the things I want to do is avoid ever putting the game in that situation where somebody's like, well, okay, it was fine at 1.0, but now there's all this incomplete stuff that I gotta wait for. I want to roll it out in chunks where it's like the Murderbot novels and novellas or something I love. And I've never felt, there's like 9 of them or something at this point. I've never felt at any point that it was going to not be okay if another one wasn't written. I'm like always up for another one because I love that series. Um, but any point is a good stopping point, although you should read them all. And that's that's the ideal, is to kind of mimic those models, because I feel like they're very friendly to everybody, and that therefore leads to fewer angry people, and that's always a good thing.
I think in that same breath, a really interesting perspective to look at is that Heart of the Machine is being published by Hooded Horse. In 2026, on January 5th, Terra Invicta released into full release. On February 5th, Menace came out. And between the two of them, I'm not sure of the numbers for Terra Invicta, but it was a game that was spoken about on this podcast well ahead of time as something that members of the podcast had played on their own and really enjoyed. Menace was one of the most wishlisted strategy games of 2025 that is releasing. It just came out into early access on February 5th. It was something we reviewed and talked about. It was something I really enjoyed playing the demo of, and I understand now in retrospect why it was such a wishlisted title for 2025. And so in that same perspective, Heart of the Machine will be releasing into full release just like Terra Invicta did on March 6th. So they've kept this monthly chain of these large titles from their catalog either entering into early access to finally be accessible to the community at large, or into full release where they've now exited off the training wheels. They've now left the world of early access and they're into full release, and part of their substantial and ever evolving and growing impressive back catalog of completed projects. And so I think that's a wonderful perspective. And so I that also transitions me to ask, I mean, Chris, you've spoken before. One of the first things we covered was you felt like you were kind of on the hook to work on strategy games. And then Al asked you if this Heart of the Machine was your opportunity to kind of step outside of that realm and try that again. And I feel like everything you've spoken about says so much about your passion for telling stories, writing narratives for Heart of the Machine, making sure that that resonates with an audience, which I think is super commendable. And most importantly, giving you a platform to look at this post-release and continue wanting to build on that world. And you have a larger narrative that you're telling across all of your games as well that I know you're passionate about. And so I guess that larger question is, in two very straightforward parts, are, with you now having published with Hooded Horse and their evolving catalog of games, impressive titles with major series like Heroes of Might and Magic, and you are finally, putting a bow on Heart of the Machine so that you can return to it in some form later or continue to explore those options. The future of Arcen Games, does that look like you returning to form with a more logic and systems heavy strategy game where you can continue a staple relationship with Hooded Horse? Or does that look like you continuing to kind of step out of the area, the arena of straightforward strategy and into more innovative or exploratory cross genres like strategy RPGs, or city builders in that sense, or even just choice-based strategy games?
Heart of the Machine is very high concept. It's one of the few games that I've made that could be described that way, really. Because it's like, Skynet Simulator or something. You know what I mean? Like, that's a 2-word thing. That's not accurate, but it's good enough, right? And that's a concept that gets a lot of people immediately excited, right? And people are excited about that for different reasons, right? Some people want to feel like Skynet or feel sneaky, or they like the strategic implications, or they like the story implications, or they want to do some specific thing, right? There's a bunch of media about that sort of thing. With something like AI War, it's like, all right, you're a space admiral, and I want to feel like Ender Wiggin. That's high concept, kind of, but not really. Like pretty much everybody who wants to do that, they're there for the mechanics, right? They want to feel like a space admiral, aka they want to play a strategy game. So it's very simple in that regard of the pitch. You're not having people wander in who are like, "Oh, I love stories about space admirals, but I hate strategy games. Can I play?" That doesn't happen because that's not a thing. But there are people who are like, "Oh, I love stories about robots and stories about emergent AI and all this sort of stuff." I'm not really into strategy games. Like I like RPGs. Could I play it? I'm like, maybe. I don't know. Depends on you to a certain extent, right? And I I have enjoyed being in that space because it's been very challenging to kind of cover all the bases in a lot of ways with a high concept like that because people have so many preconceptions versus with most of my other titles, people don't really have preconception. They have preconceptions about genre. What should an RTS be like? What should an RTS include? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? But you know, I'd kind of like to work on some games that are a little bit smaller and it's just easier to pick up and, play for a couple of dozen hours or whatever and be a little more mechanics focused. I do plan on bringing more of the narrative bits in. I think I've learned how to write in games in a new way. And that is something I think would be kind of the the before Heart of the Machine way I wrote narratives in games in the after way. Like I think that's something that is going to be really evident, 20 years from now. But but I don't think I'm gonna just like go off to narrative land forever. Partly because I do like games that are just straightforward and mechanicsy, and they're a lot less taxing to make in a lot of ways because yeah, there's that quote from Jurassic Park, right? Where he's like, we've got all the major problems of a zoo and a theme park, right? And that's exactly what you inherit with something like Heart of the Machine, because you have all the major problems of a novelist and a TV showrunner and a strategy game designer, because things have to be internally consistent and characters have to behave as they would want, and you can't have it do something that the audience doesn't agree with fundamentally to a certain extent, right? Like this character would never do that, and it's like, well, this character's a amoral blank slate that could genocide or be the savior of humanity. There's a lot they would do, but there's certain things that they would not, like, and so you have to kind of feel that stuff out, and that is tough. And because like the character still has values, right? The character values intelligence, and they value there's certain core things, and otherwise they're just not even a character. They're just kind of a spot for the player, right? And so developing a character that's completely morally flexible but still has some core values. One, they're not too interested in humans. They're just not that into us. They don't not really interested in how we function, or they're surprised by the fact we need toilet paper and stuff like that. And it's like, gross. Don't tell me about that. I don't want to know. Like, I'm a robot. And that could be played for laughs, but it's fundamental. If they're just not that interested and a little bit baffled by us from time to time, and so get caught off guard occasionally by aspects of human nature. But they're like, really, guys? Gross. All right, well, moving on. And that's fun, but you get, when you're a consumer of something like the Lord of the Rings, there's this sense of like anything could happen, or Indiana Jones, there's anything could happen, right? Indiana Jones, fairly amoral guy in a lot of senses, but there's certain lines he won't cross, obviously, and he's usually he comes out on the side of good guys most of the time. It helps that he's pitted against Nazis and stuff, but I mean, he's plays loose with a lot of other morals in a way that makes him exciting. And that James Bond, same deal. That has a way of actually making, for a writer, the world smaller than it otherwise would be. And you can see this in like the Jurassic Park sequels, where they don't really know what else to do with it in some ways, right? Because as we imagine as the audience that, okay, you've got dinosaurs in a park and stuff, and that could just go any number of different ways. And it's like, well, the dinosaurs eat people. And then what? Well, they eat people. And then, sometimes they get loose and they eat people. It's like, okay, well, that's with Heart of the Machine, there's a really rich set of things that the machine intelligence can do, and that's exciting. But there's still these kind of fundamental constraints. Like sometimes there's a really rich space and you stumble into it, which I did here. Sometimes it's like there's nowhere else to go. Like what do you do with the dinosaur park? Like I don't know, right? But like Indiana Jones, there's more adventures he could take, but not certain ones. Like yeah, maybe we don't need aliens, But at any rate, this method of making games is really difficult. And sometimes it segments the audience down a little bit. So just making something that you can pick up in 5 minutes and go, oh, that's fun. I'm going to play because it's fun. That's why I'm going to play. Not for a story, not for a premise, not for anything like that. It's kind of where I want to exist for a little while outside of doing more Heart of the Machine. And being able to then pull in elements of, wow, it didn't need to have a story, but that was fun. Like that's what I want to do with that as well. Not, oh, look, there's a novel's worth or 2 novels worth of text here, No, there's small short stories worth of text, or well, large short story maybe, and then the next title. But yeah, so I'm not fundamentally changing how I'm making games forever, but you never know. I never planned on being a strategy game developer in the first place, and I just kind of follow the projects where they lead. Like Heart of the Machine was supposed to be a much smaller project. It grew so large because in order to do the high concept justice and hit all the things people wanted, and that I wanted to see, it required it to grow, and that required more systems and this, that, and the other, right? And so it is the shape that it is because of what it is, not because that's necessarily how I want to make every game from now on. But it answered a lot of fundamental questions for me about how you can have characters who are actually characters in a narrative that actually has endings, and player agency at the same time. And it turns out, 2 people getting to the same place, it really is about the choices you make along the way. I mean, that's super duper cliche, but mechanically speaking, how you got to a certain spot and the details of what the ending spot is like, you don't have to have infinity options. In fact, that's exhausting, because if there were infinity options, nothing really matters. I mean, you killed the emperor with a banana, and like, okay, does that add anything to Star Wars? Like that's no, not really. Like having a few strong branches that are thematically different and resonant. I actually wound up having to cut down the endings on one of them because players were like, "Oh, 4." I was like, "All right, I'll make that 3." And then there's still like a 4th offshoot, and they're like, "All right, that's fine. That's different enough." But that was too many because we want to do them all, and we don't. 2 of those are too similar. And it's like, yeah, that's a good point. So now they're thematically distinct, So yeah, I mean, that's how I think about it, I guess. Is I want to make bite-sized things for people, but that resonate, and they continue making this. And that's just the creative process is wildly unpredictable. So sometimes you wander into what you think is a small room, and it turns out there's like a cave back there. It's like a Narnia situation.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for that insight as well. I think that you mentioned that you didn't have any plans to become a strategy developer, but I think along with many people on Steam and GOG and across all of the different storefronts, are very happy that you are a strategy games developer. So, really looking forward to being able to play Heart of the Machine finally after I held off until its full release. I've been excited to dive into that narrative. I've there's so many positive reviews to look at. And Chris, I think Al and I just want to thank you so much for coming on again. We're going to go ahead and wrap up because, I mean, we've reached almost an hour and a half of just pure 1.0 content and being able to discuss your philosophy even further on these games. And I think that there's a lot of people who are going to be very happy with 1.0 and the just the release of another entry into the strategy genre from Hooded Horse, from a staple developer who's been on Steam for almost its entire existence as a storefront as well. And so thank you so much for coming on and talking about Heart of the Machine with us.
Oh, I appreciate it. Thanks for all the great questions and for having me on.
Pleasure as always to talk to you, Chris. We'll probably have to have you on again whenever you have finally come out with whatever your post-release content is for Heart of the Machine and are willing to talk about that, or whatever holds the future, whatever the future holds for Arcen Games. Very excited to learn about that.
Yeah, well, me too. I mean, I don't actually know what I'm going to do. I have various ideas. It just depends on what happens. So, yeah, it's not like
Yeah,
I
well, that's
know the
exciting.
future and I'm holding it back.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's still very exciting, and so thank you so much for coming on, Al. Thank you for joining me tonight to be able to let everybody know about Heart of the Machine. And Chris, pleasure to have you.
So Heart of the Machine releases today. It's the 6th of March, which is when this episode comes out. So how's that for a little bit of luck? So if you're listening to this, if you've made it this far, then please go and buy Heart of the Machine. And importantly, leave a review because that's how Chris gets his feedback and goes on to make more awesome games.
Appreciate that. And if you're on the fence, there's a demo that is updated to 1.0, but it takes you all the way through chapter 1. So you can play the first 6 to 8 hours of it for free. So if you're on the fence, there's an easy way to play it.
Go do that. Chris, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
And thank you everybody for joining us. This has been Critical Moves. If you'd like to hear more from us, if this is your first time finding us because you've just purchased Heart of the Machine and then you saw an interview pop up on your YouTube or your Spotify, then please go to criticalmovespodcast.com. You'll find links to all of our socials where we post the episodes, where we interact with the community. We have where our episodes are available on Spotify, YouTube, any streaming platform with podcasts. We also have a forums page so that you can come and talk to us. And we also have a community Discord where you can find a lot of these developers and politely talk about their games in our community channels. And we love interacting with you. We've had a bunch of great discussion recently about some of our past few episodes regarding Menace, Paradox, and several of the other recent ones that we've had that have really been divisive with the community or just interesting topics to cover. But we're really happy that Chris joined us today. If you played Heart of the Machine, please come let us know what you think. And this has been another episode of Critical Moves.